All right, hi, I'm Todd. Tonight I'll be talking about component patterns in Ember, but first a little bit about myself. I am one of the Triangle Ember meetup organizers, so we do stuff very periodically, have like a hack night, try to do that once a month. And so if you want to learn, come out to one of those. I can sit down with you, go through a tutorial, teach you a little bit about it, or if you're working on something already, we can just code along, or if you just want to chat. A lot of times the conversations get off of Ember pretty quick. Also, we have meetups and speakers and stuff like that. So if you're a closet Ember user and have something cool to share, let me know. We're always looking for speakers. Secondly, I'm on the Ember Learn team, and so Ember has a bunch of sub-teams that work on different parts, like Ember Data and Ember Core. And so my task on the Ember team is the website, the guides, communicating Ember, teaching Ember to people. So that takes up the wee hours of the morning for me. And then finally, I work at Interactive Intelligence here in RTP. And we have a large Ember application platform. We also do a lot of other cool stuff. We're a microservices platform, so we do a little Clojure, a little Node, a little Java. So hit us up if you're interested in joining us. Got a little plug. All right, a little bit about Ember. So just a little fun facts about Ember. I know a lot of people are, big into Angular and React, and just to give a little fun fact, if you don't haven't messed with Ember some principles are stability without stagnation, meaning it's really careful about Semver. Uses deprecation workflow. It transitions from version to version without you having to rewrite stuff. So they're pretty good about that. Our company has been on since pre-1.0. They were worse about this early on, but have gotten a lot better in recent things. And so on some of the recent big upgrades, we've been pretty seamless. So it's been cool. Convention over configuration, pulled a lot from the Ruby community there. Things just kind of, if it's in a certain directory, named a certain file, then Ember kind of knows what it is. You don't really have to configure stuff. It's pretty smart about a lot of things. It's got a really cool CLI environment where, if you're sick of building build pipelines and putting together your linting and your testing and stuff like that, and when you say Ember new your project, all that stuff's built and ready to deploy, and you can just focus on application stuff. So that's a cool thing about it. And then finally, it's community owned and maintained, so it's not ruled by a specific corporation. It's a diverse community of people kind of built into Ember, and it's got some pretty cool processes around RFCs and introducing new content and stuff like that. So that can be a positive and a minus. I guess they're not employing a bunch of people and giving them a lot of money to build in. A lot of people do this as a labor of love. A little bit about the talk tonight. So components are everywhere. So the talk's going to be on components and patterns we use with components in Ember. And so, things have rapidly moved off of MV star over the last couple of years and have gone into more of a component-based architecture around your web UIs. And so we've taken some lumps and learned a lot of things. And so I wanted to kind of share that with some of the lessons that our project has learned and some of the directions we're heading in creating components and piecing them together. Like I said, we're a big Ember app, and we've been doing it for a long time. We've made a lot of mistakes, and there's a lot of parts of our code where we're like, oh, we don't like to look there. But, that's also taught us a lot of things, and so we feel like we're a little bit better at it these days than we used to be. But that said, I'm going to give you some patterns, but this is not like you must always use these patterns. I'm going to talk about trade-offs with these patterns, and it's really good to understand, you don't have to do it this way, but you got to understand what you're giving up and, what the benefits of it are as well. And then finally, I did this all in this tool called Twiddle, Ember Twiddle. And this is a tool kind of like JSPen where you can, it's JSPen, but it's already set up for Ember. And so you can easily add Ember components and different things like that and get them rendering on the screen. And so my actual presentation has these Twiddle embeds in them, and I put the presentation online so you can actually get on a little bit later and play with some of the little app stuff that I wrote in component patterns and see if you can break things. And then finally, since all these other architectures, frameworks are using components, maybe some of this will translate. Maybe it'll give you some ideas for your own stuff. Or maybe you might be interested in picking up an Ember project, and it gives you kind of a basic mechanics of how Ember components are working. So first I'll start with basics of an Ember component. Essentially, you have two pieces of an Ember component. You have a JavaScript piece and a template piece. The template is handlebars, which is a templating technology that Ember's kind of really taken and run with. It's actually implemented this thing called HTML bars, which is handlebars, but with a lot of performance improvements and really cool stuff for Ember's usage of handlebars. And then the JavaScript part handles actions and where you need to add JavaScript to it. It's got inputs, set inputs, data. You give it data that gets bound down. You give it actions where you can invoke essentially callbacks and notify things when things happen with your component. And then its outputs are your rendered screen, but it can also yield data to its subcomponents. And so it's very it can be very functional where it has very set inputs, and when you give it inputs, it can give you set outputs. So on to the patterns. Our first pattern is our functional components and DDAU. So DDAU stands for data down, actions up. It's really, if you do this pattern, it's kind of Ember's sweet spot, and things tend to go pretty well for you. And so it's kind of scratching your itch there. So the demo I'm going to give is and it'll be with all these patterns. It's going to be writing the same app, but in different patterns to kind of show you that. And so it's just a very simple app called Giffy Ping. And so it's going to be a component that sends a Giffy to another component, a Giffy Ping component. Essentially, this is kind of the layout. You have a Giffy display component, a Giffy input component, and that's wrapped in a Giffy Ping component. And then a route is essentially, it represents your page that you're on. And there's basic code up top at the route. It keeps your model in a data down, action up format. All your data is kept up in your model. You send actions up. Here, I'll actually play through it for you. So Giffy input will send a submit action up. It'll go to your route. The route will set the model, and then the URL that comes back from Giffy gets bound down to display. Okay, so what we have here is our index template, which represents the route action, and I created two Giffy Ping components. Essentially, we're passing it data, the model information about what our URL is, and we're passing a callback, which is called an action, and then the client's just giving it a name so that it renders. And then if you look in our component, so here's the JavaScript parts of the component, here's the template parts of the component, here's the index, which has the code that sets the model. If we look at the Giffy Ping component, within there it's going to have your display component, it's going to have your input component. So if you follow the flow, when you fill in your input and you click enter, so if we drop into our input component, it's going to take the value of your input field and call an action to say handle submit, passing up the value. The Giffy Ping component will then say, okay, when that handle submit is called off my input component, I'm going to call up and call the submit action. And then that goes up to our index template. And our submit action is going to be this submit image source. And that goes all the way up to the route. JavaScript. And that function's then going to set the result, which then will get bound. We'll go back down that tree, essentially, and pass the current URL back down. So let me see if I can actually show this guy. Hey, there we go. Okay, so then if I say hi, and we'll get a little hi, and then we'll say hi back, and it's going to show back. And so essentially that action's coming up, setting the data up top, data bounce down. So when you do this, and when you try to keep this first and at all possible, things go pretty well for you in Ember. So there's a trade-off there. Having that data down, action up gives you great predictability. When you pass in specific data to a component, you're always going to get the same output. And predictability is great in programming because you know that things aren't going to be go wild for you. If you're passing a certain data, you know you're always going to get the same output. Now, if your component's keeping state, it's going to have a little bit more control as the component itself. And there might be some reasons you do this, and we'll go into that a little bit later. But because that component might have state, when you're passing it something, then you might not always get the same output. So that's your trade-off there on a basic level. Second pattern, data morphing. And so you have this concept of tagless components in Ember, which we showed you that initial thing where you have data and actions where you're passing into your component and rendered data and rendered output and yielded data coming out. But if you take the rendered data out of it, then your component is actually decorating data-wise the subcomponents underneath it. Now with Giffy ping, we're just going to say, we're going to, so say you don't like the picture you get sent to the other guy, you can toggle pictures. And so you might say, I don't like this picture, I'll push enter again, send another, it'll pick the next URL in the list of URLs Giffy gives you back. And so it's just kind of moving your offset. And we create a component called Giffy Selector that will take a search value and an offset and or your list of search results and your offset and just move that offset one and pick the Giffy in the list that you want to display. So essentially the reason this is red is because I'll show you in a second. It's what's called a block component, and you can actually have Giffy ping define the subcomponents within that selector, and the selector is just yielding data to those subcomponents. So let me play that for you. So you get a submit on the search. That calls submit up into the model, which sets the model, gives you a list of URLs, which gets passed down to Giffy Selector, our morphing component, which picks the right URL out of that and passes it to the Giffy display to display the right URL. And we'll show you that in a second. So this is our Giffy Selector component. So what we're looking at is our Giffy ping template. And because there's a little hashtag in front of Giffy Selector, it means it's a block component, which means the parent can define the subcomponents here. And the actual Giffy Selector is yielding data to these guys. So it's giving you a Giffy URL based off the current URLs you pass it. And so, and then we're passing that to Giffy URL list. And if you look at the template for Giffy Selector, it's just yielding selected URL, and then the JavaScript will be actually giving you the offset of the URLs you come in. So if we look at that, 5 minutes, all right. All right, so if I give you sub, and then I push enter again, if the network is okay, it's going to start toggling through, just moving the offset along. So, all right, so your trade-offs here. Now you could, instead of using a wrapping component to morph data, you could simply, put that code in the component itself. But so that might be a little bit simpler to declare, but you're separating concerns by morphing the data in a separate component, and so you're a little bit more declarative, and you can decorate your main Giffy display and input in different ways. So if you want to use different methods of setting the offset, you could do that. One example I know that a lot of people use in production is there's a pagination type of components where you have a table and that it's bound to a list. And as you scroll, it's sending up events of, hey, I'm scrolling down to the next page, sending up actions to that component that's surrounding it, and the component's pulling, a couple pages ahead. And so you can implement pagination that way. So I told you about block components before, but block components go a lot further than that and give you a lot of flexibility. So what I'll do now is it's the same picture you saw before, but now at the index level, Giffy ping is actually yielding components, it's subcomponents. And so you can actually So actually, let me explain a little bit. So what we've seen so far is Giffy Ping owned all its components, and it owned the layout of those components too. But it's kind of a dull layout, and so if you wanted to add some spice to that layout as the implementing app, then we can give you control over where those layouts go and what markup is around it. And the way we do that is by yielding those components to the consumer in the form of block components. And let me show you what that looks like. Okay, here we go. Here's the two different ways to use it. So this is what we've shown you so far. Just the first Giffy Ping client is just you're passing it data and the action. The second Giffy Ping client is in block form, and we are actually yielding this object called Giffy, and Giffy is actually yielding to us the input component and the display component. And notice that these components aren't passing any arguments. It's because our Giffy Ping component knows what the arguments are going to be, because previously it owned it and it gave it its arguments. So it's just yielding out, here's the component to its user and saying, it's already going to be rendered, but here it is, so you can lay it out on the screen however you want it. And let's show you that. We've added a little bit of extra information, right? We put it in H2. We gave you some little extra instructions. Let's do that. So here's the first client, the one we've seen before, and here's the one. It's been put in H2. It's got a little bit of instructions, and if I send a message over to it, then it gives us an incoming, and we've seen that one already. So let's see if we can do that again. Yeah, a lot bug. All right, so the trade-offs here is you get maximum customization there, right? Because you can put in markup, you can apply your own styles or whatever, as opposed to easy defaults. And you can actually have both worlds with it. There's you can put an if statement in your template that says, am I in block form, then yield everything. But if I'm not in block form, then give me the basics. So finally, the last one, there's a lot more patterns to this, but these are some main ones that we're talking about. Coordinating components. So sometimes, let's say, Giffy Ping is a hit. I want to make it an add-on. I want everybody in the world to use it. But what we're yielding a lot of data. We're sending up a lot of data and requiring the index.js to do a lot of work. And so consumers of this might get kind of frustrated with that. And so we want this thing to be no hassle. Just drop in Giffy Ping and have it coordinate the Giffy search. Because right now our index route is actually calling out to the Giffy API. But if we want to package this out, we don't want our clients to worry about the Giffy API. We just want to search it ourselves. So same kind of diagram here. But in this case, all we're going to pass up to the model is the search value. And so we're going to submit the search value and then bind the search value back down. And then our component itself is going to do the Giffy search. Now, this gives it state, right? And so it's no longer a purely functional component that has side effects. It's keeping state. But we're keeping the state at the top level of that component. And those subcomponents are still functional components. So this is almost like a mini application in itself. So we're still trying to keep state as high as we can, but we're keeping state at the top level of our components so we can give our implementers a little bit less hassle in this case. So what that might look like, if you look at our list of files, we no longer, let's see, our index.js is super simple now. We're just passing the value, and our actual Giffy Ping JavaScript is doing our work here. And this is actually, Ember components have lifecycle hooks, and so this is did receive adders, and it's just saying whenever our search value attribute changes from our parent, we're actually going to implement this search and then set the URLs there. And then the same stuff happens from then on. Those URLs are bound, and then Giffy reacts accordingly. So the trade-off there is ease of use, like I said, versus the application's power over state. And sometimes you want one, sometimes you want the other. All right, the final one is, so we're still passing the search value up, right? And so these two clients could be on different routes, and they also could be on different computers. And so if we want to take all need for state handling away from the application, you can kind of implement a service bus. So Ember has this concept of services, and they are essentially a singleton service that you can look up and inject into your application based on like a service locator pattern. And you can use this to register and subscribe to changes. And so instead of calling the index route to set your search value, in this case we are sending the registering a callback to our event service, and then when we submit, we send an event out. The callback gets called, the Giffy gets rendered. And so quickly, this is my last pattern. What this looks like is we have an event service, an essential simple register and send, and then right now we have no more index JavaScript. There's no need for it anymore because we're using that service. And then the work is done then in Giffy ping, where this is where we register our callback when we create it. And then when the callback's called, we actually call our Giffy service. And then when you actually submit the action, we send down here the result. And so, you get the same results here. What's up? All right. So the trade-off here, like I talked about, was predictable data flow. You kind of lose your data up actions, data down actions up flow there because you're talking service buses, but then you get data flow over complexity where you can send events across. So imagine if you have a huge component tree and you're passing all these events up, your top of the tree is going to get really heavy. And so in cases where you want to just pass those things across, you can. All right, and so we'll go through some anti-patterns real quick. jQuery is a hammer, avoid using that. Let's see, try devoid coupling to your app implementation. We've gotten use good programming patterns when using your services. And thanks. Here's some contact stuff. I'm on Twitter, GitHub, Slack. There's a Triangle Slack. If you're a developer in the Triangle, you can use that. There's also an Ember Slack if you're learning Ember to get questions answered and just talk about stuff. And there's our meetup. And again, I posted the link to this guy on the Ember meetup, so you can play in those twiddles if you want to a little later. All right, thanks.